If you're interested in changing or modifying people's beliefs, attitudes, intentions, even their behaviors, one approach you can use is strategic communication. And one of the first and most important steps of strategic communication is to know your audience. One way you can know your audience is by asking them questions, figuring out what's on their mind. What are their beliefs, attitudes, intentions? What are their past behaviors? And one of the ways of doing that is by conducting surveys. You can get people to fill out surveys to learn what's on their mind. If you want to know what's on people's mind about climate change, a simple way of doing that is getting them to fill out the SASSY, the Six Americas Super Short Survey. I don't know where the Y came from, but it's a cute name, especially the exclamation mark. This instrument was developed by the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication in collaboration with George Mason University. There were originally 36 questions that researchers would use to understand the American public and group them into different groups of people when it comes to how they think about the issue. Group them into different publics. They've whittled this down to 4 questions. How important is the issue of global warming to you personally? How worried are you about global warming? How much do you think global warming will harm you personally? And how much do you think global warming will harm future generations of people? Now, this is called the Six Americas Super Short Survey, but there are versions of this for many other countries in many other languages. And they use data from this to divide the American public into, well, in this case, 6 Americas. 6 different audience segments. I'm going to briefly describe those. The first audience segment is the alarmed segment. And by the way, this is from the most recent survey, which was conducted in 2024. So 26% of the American public fall into the alarmed segment, where they believe climate change is happening, they have good knowledge of it, they are highly concerned, and they think there's a need for urgent action. The next segment is the concerned. That's about 28% of the American public. These folks are quite similar to the alarm, just to a lesser extent. They aren't as willing as the alarm to go out and encourage other people to change. They aren't as proactive about addressing the issue. They aren't as concerned as the alarmed. The alarmed is a fitting title. Concerned is a lower level of concern, right? But these 2 groups of Americans, these 2 segments, are quite similar. The next one is the cautious segment. They are aware of climate change. They believe it's happening, but they aren't sure it's a problem. They aren't sure if something needs to be done about it. They aren't sure the extent to which it's going to harm people now or future generations, right? So they agree it's happening, but they aren't too bothered by it. Next is the disengaged. This is about 5% of the American public. These people just don't think about the issue. You can ask them, what do you think about climate change? They'll say, I don't know, I don't think about it. And that's about all you're going to get from them. Going down is the doubtful. This is 12%. These are people who have heard of climate change, but they're skeptical. They know that there's something going on with the climate, but maybe it's not caused by humans, or maybe it's not the problem that climate alarmists make it out to be. And then there are the dismissive. These are about 10% of the American public. They're aware of climate change and they think it's a hoax, right? They dismiss it outright. There's bad science. Show me good science and you'll convince me, but they won't look at it, right? They're just dismissive. They disagree with it. Maybe it goes against some of their values. Anyway, these are 6 segments that those 4 questions, the SASSY, can differentiate. And there's a lot going on here in terms of how these people think about climate change that you can garner from those 4 questions. I'll get to that in a minute, but let's look at something interesting. This project has been going on for over a decade now, and it's nice to compare how these segments have changed over the past 10 years. Here we can see this is Global Warming 6 Americas from 2014 to 2024. And what's nice to see, if you think it's good to have people being alarmed about climate change, It's nice to see that the alarmed group has increased from 15% in 2014 to 26% in 2024. That one increased, which is good, except for that was mostly just by cannibalizing the concerned and cautious groups. Those ones collectively decreased by about 9%. It's definitely a good thing that the cautious segment has shifted more to the alarmed segment, or probably more likely they shifted to the concerned segment and a lot of the concerned became alarmed. But if you look at the bottom three segments, the disengaged, the doubtful, the dismissive, they haven't shifted much. They're kind of stuck down there. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge. One way of approaching these lower segments is to really understand how these different groups of people think and strategize about how to approach them. This is another way of thinking about the 6 segments in terms of issue involvement and attitude valence. So attitude valence, if you see on the left, there's the alarmed group, and on the right is the dismissive. Basically what that valence means is as you get more alarmed, or as you move to the left on this chart, you are more concerned, you believe climate change needs to be dealt with. As you move more to the right, you think climate change is a hoax, you think the evidence is shoddy, things of that nature. So that's one way of categorizing these 6 segments, kind of linearly in that fashion. But another way of categorizing them is issue involvement, because those that are most involved are the alarmed and the dismissive. The alarmed are particularly involved at saying, hey, climate change is a problem, we need to do something about it, I'm really concerned. And then there are the dismissive, also saying, look, I'm really into this issue as well, it's clearly a hoax, we need to get the word out. And as you move toward the middle, so the concerned and doubtful, the cautious, and especially the disengaged, that issue involvement decreases. So these are a couple ways of categorizing the 6 segments with respect to how much they engage in communication with other people. Those who are alarmed and dismissive probably talk a lot. And how receptive they are to different types of messages. And it also informs certain messaging strategies, which I'll get to somewhat in the next lecture. But we can learn even more about these groups. For example, they can be categorized in terms of egalitarianism or individualism. Egalitarians are really concerned about the common good, protecting the weak, making self-sacrifice for strangers. Individualists are more about everyone for themselves, strongest survives, or survival of the fittest. And these are different ways of thinking about the self in relation to society. And what we can see is a fairly clear pattern as we move from the alarmed segment to the dismissive segment, from left to right. Egalitarianism decreases and individualism increases. So those who are alarmed tend to be the most egalitarian and the least individualistic, and those who are doubtful and dismissive tend to be the most individualistic and least egalitarian. So this also kind of provides some framework for understanding how these types of individuals think and how we can approach, at least attempt to persuade the disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive toward maybe being at least cautious, starting to accept some of the scientific evidence about climate change. I'll actually be talking a little bit more about these in the next lecture, discussing specific strategies for reaching these different segments. Stay tuned.